Welcome everybody to the Licensing Committee on Wednesday the 26th of October 2022. Can I have apologies for absence, please?
Councillor Wallace, Chair.
Councillor Wallace, thank you. Councillor Foster.
Chair, just to give my apologies, if the meeting's still going at 3:30, I do need to leave for a medical appointment. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Partial apology. No more? Minutes of the last meeting. Do you agree I signed those minutes? That's correct. Thank you. Disclosure of members' interest? None. Report of the Director of Housing and Public Prosecution on the Gambling Act. Protection.
Is that prosecution?
Prosecution. Sorry. The Gambling Act.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a report to advise members of the proposed consultation regarding the Statement of Principles for the Gambling Act and seek the committee's approval to consult on the proposed policy. There are no major policy changes to the document proposed by officers. However, we do have to review the Gambling Statement of Licence and Principles at intervals, and it is due to be reviewed at this moment in time. It was last reviewed in January 2019, which we made significant changes to the policy. It was a full policy document rewrite, so it's not thought that there's any changes required other than a few minor tweaks where legislation or officers have changed. So it's simply a request for members to approve a consultation again to start on the 1st of November to run for 12 weeks.
Any comments on that one? It's just there for consultation again. Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Smith. Smith? Lee. Seconded, please, Councillor. Getting worse. I'm not telling you. Councillor Shaw. Any debate on this? Show of hands, please, for the recommendation. Andy, unanimous. We now go on to Trading Standards update. Laura. Do you want your microphone?
Oh, that was false.
Just press a button.
There we go, all sorted. Okay, so I'm Laura Brooks, I'm the Trading Standards and Animal Health Manager here at Northumberland. I've been in post here for just over a year, and there's quite a lot been going on with the service during that time. So the presentation this afternoon is to focus on the work that we've been doing with age-restricted sales and illicit products. If I could just say there is quite a lot to race through. There isn't going to be a test at the end, so you'll be quite glad about that. But if you do have any questions, then by all means, can you please ask them at the end, because it's possible that I might answer some of them as I go through things. So as far as age-restricted sales is concerned, Trading Standards are responsible for enforcing the law on quite a number of products, which does include alcohol, tobacco and vapes, which are the three that I'm going to focus on the vast majority of what we're talking about this afternoon. It is illegal for any of those things to be sold to anybody under the age of 18, and there are various ways in which we can deal with that. So primarily we do a lot of work with preventing underage sales from occurring in the first place through education and advice to our traders across the county. We raised their awareness of what the law actually requires. It is an absolute offence to sell to somebody under the age of 18, which means that the offence is committed regardless of whether you knew the person was under 18 or not, which is quite harsh. So in which case, there are various defences under the legislation that come down to being able to show that you took all reasonable precautions and exercised all due diligence to stop the offence from occurring in the first place. So as part of that, we encourage that businesses train their staff on what the law says and also use refusals ledgers and adopt a Challenge 25 policy, which I'll explain a little bit more about in a moment. So we also need to gather intelligence as to underage sales that do occur across businesses. It is a fact of life. This does happen. And we need the information and those complaints about which businesses are doing this, because that helps us to target test purchase operations where we send in underage volunteer children to purchase products under our instruction. So just to focus there on what is a refusals ledger. These refusals ledger and Challenge 25 are terms that are just talked about quite a lot. And the feature on licences to sell alcohol as being a requirement for some licensed businesses, licensed premises to adopt these things. So I just thought it might be beneficial to show you that the point of a refusals ledger is that anybody that works in a shop and somebody has attempted to buy a product that is age restricted and the sale is refused because they're not old enough, that they actually make a record of that happening. The purpose of this is that the business can demonstrate that if they're asked by authorities what steps are you taking to stop underage sales from occurring, that they are actively trying to stop it from happening, and they can show us this log as to sales that are refused. As I say, the vast majority of businesses will experience underage people trying to buy products. It is a fact of life. So we would be incredibly surprised if any shop didn't have a record of those attempts. The point of it from the management point of view is that when offences are committed, it isn't only the actual seller of the product that commits an offence, it is the business operator as well. It can be attributed to them. So they have a responsibility to make sure that their staff aren't doing things that they're not meant to be. So part of this is that they check the refusals ledger to make sure that it's getting filled out, basically, and sign it off at the bottom there at regular intervals. So Challenge 25 is, there is sometimes a bit of a misconception with this, as to some people think that it means that businesses won't sell products to anybody under the age of 25, which isn't what this is about. This is about decreasing the risk of underage sales. So if you have a line of people and the age limit for the product is 18 years old, and you go along the line and you try to work out who is over the age of 18 and who isn't, I should amend that to say a row of young people. It is quite hard to determine. Whereas if you go along the same row of people and think which of these people is over 25 and which are under 25, it is slightly easier. And the chances are, if you get it wrong, that if you're asking anybody that you think is under 25 for ID, then you're reducing the number of sales that would occur to under 18s. I'm not so sure if I explained that very well, but I hope you understand what it is that I'm trying to drive at here. So it is something that we strongly encourage in trading standards because it really does work at getting it into the mindset of people that work in businesses to be asking for ID. Most young people under the age of 25 are very familiar with carrying ID because of this policy having been around for such a long time. So I also mentioned about intelligence gathering and test purchase operations, and we can only do test purchasing at premises that we're aware of there being implied problems. So it is essential that we're told about these problems. So everybody plays a role in this, yourselves included, and if any of the residents are coming to you with concerns about a business, it is essential that that information is passed on to us in trading standards, either through yourselves or actively encouraging in them to report it to us. It can be reported online via the council website. There is a specific form that we have on there for this purpose, and that information can be submitted anonymously if the person doesn't really want to give us their details. Any information is good information, even if it's just, we think underage sales are happening at this shop. That's enough for us to be able to look at it and build up a picture as to what is happening in certain areas. We do ask on the form for a lot more than that, but we accept that it isn't always going to be possible to provide. We don't need like the nth degree, basically, to be able to act upon the information. So the other means that the information can be reported is by email directly to the service at tradingstandards@northumberland.gov.uk. So what are the sanctions for selling selling age-restricted, put my teeth back in now. What are the sanctions for selling age-restricted products to those people that are underage? I'm going to start at the bottom and say that it is criminal offences, so that prosecution is the ultimate sanction. Some underage sales offences carry a maximum penalty of imprisonment and or an unlimited fine. Other offences are just restricted to the fines, but either way it is a criminal record that would occur upon prosecution. The other route that we can look at with these types of offences are through the Licensing Act, which is about where a business has got a licence to sell alcohol, irrespective of whether the underage sale is for alcohol or whether it's for another product, it's still an underage sale. And there are still potentially breaches of the licensing objectives in terms of protecting children from harm. With that route, the first thing that we would consider is whether a minor variation of the licence to sell alcohol would be enough to encourage that business to comply with the law. So the point of this would be to add more stringent conditions with the aim of preventing the breaches from continuing in the future. But that does require the cooperation of the licence holder, and where they don't cooperate, and we believe that adding those additional conditions is still beneficial, we would look at potentially bringing a review to the licensing committee to ask for those conditions to be put onto the licence. So in the first instance, with the minor variation, the onus is on the business to achieve it at their own cost. If it goes to review, it's at our cost, and it's also committee time to ensure that that happens. The other time that we would bring a review is for underage sales as a result of test purchase and exercises. In those instances, we would often be looking at revocation of licences because we wouldn't be bringing that case to the committee for review unless we had significant concerns about underage sales occurring at the premises. Okay, so moving on to illicit products, to define what exactly it is that I mean by that in its most simplistic form, it's those products that are in the supply chain that don't comply with UK legal requirements. So first up, I'm going to talk about counterfeit alcohol. So this is when alcohol is packaged to make it look like a well-known legally produced brand. That is called counterfeiting. So you can see on the picture there that we've got bottles of Smirnoff and also some yellowtail wine in that picture. We have actually seized 109 bottles of counterfeit yellowtail wine from Northumberland businesses in the last year. There seems to have been a bit of a spate of issues with that particular product. So fake alcoholic drinks are often produced using cheap types of alcohol, which you'd normally find in products like antifreeze, screen wash and nail polish. So nobody's going to be too keen really on drinking that. I'm not saying that the products we've seized have contained that. We haven't had them analysed to determine it because we've dealt with it using trademarks legislation. But it is something that has been shown by other authorities. So another area in which we've had quite a lot of activity is with non-compliant vapes. So all e-cigarettes and all e-liquids must be registered with the MHRA before they are sold in the UK. If you sell a product that hasn't been registered, it's illicit. So products must also meet stringent safety requirements in respect of the tank size and as far as the vape, the e-cigarette itself is concerned, and the labelling of e-liquids and the ingredients that are listed on there. There are controls over what actually can go into these things. And also, let's not forget that these items actually plug in at the walls of recharge. So those chargers and things do have to comply with electrical safety stipulations. So products that don't meet these requirements are a massive concern around the country. There has been quite a concerted effort over the last few months, particularly across the North East, for seizing any items that aren't compliant with those requirements that I've just outlined. And in Northumberland, we have actually seized approximately 3,000 non-compliant vapes that have been on sale in our shops. So moving on to illicit tobacco. Tobacco products are arguably the most heavily regulated product in the UK because of the serious health risks that they present. And in order to understand what illicit tobacco is about, this is one that you really turn on its head to consider how tobacco can legally be sold. So it has to be in standardised packaging, which, as you can see from the picture there, is of a murky green specific colour. It also has to contain specific written and pictorial warnings that have to be of a certain size and have to be in a certain location on the packet. And they also have to carry the fiscal mark UK duty paid. So because of those requirements, it is quite easy to spot when a product isn't meeting what the law says. So to sell legal tobacco, it has to be stored undercover as well. It mustn't be on open display to the public other than in very limited circumstances, which is things like restocking, or it's a tobacconists type premises, or obviously you've got to open the doors when you're actually selling the product to somebody. But this is about keeping it out of sight, basically, to avoid temptation. Another very important part of selling tobacco legally is that it must not be sold to children. That sign that's on the side there is a legal notice that's required that you should all really be familiar with when you've been to the newsagents and whatnot. That sign is always up to say that it's illegal to sell to anybody under 18. So just coming back to what I've said there about tobacco products being a heavily regulated product because of the health risks, illicit tobacco is sold in defiance of all of those controls that have been put in place. So it undermines public health initiatives. Children aren't protected from harm. Often you find that where illicit tobacco is being sold, it's being sold to children. And the supply of illicit tobacco is also connected regularly with organised crime groups. So in Northumberland, we have found a lot of illicit tobacco. It is on sale, has been on sale through retailers, and also allegations that it's on sale through tab houses. So we are in the process of dealing with those types of issues. So as the first priority, removing the products from the marketplace is what we need to achieve. And that is true of tobacco, of vapes, of alcohol, any of those products. The main important thing is to get it off sale. So we seize those items, and we also, at the same time, look to get them voluntarily surrendered, because that would then avoid the need for us to go to court and ask for forfeiture. If ownership of the goods is transferred to us, then that's an easy way of dealing with it. So sometimes we find when we go to look out for these products that they've been hidden away from us to avoid detection. So the picture there that is on the slide is a hidden concealment that we found in a business in Northumberland, where it was the tiled wall. They would literally had cut a hole in the wall as a secret hiding place for the illicit tobacco. So that was actually found with the assistance of a sniffer dog, because this is a tool that we use in trading standards to be able to find where these products are being hidden, because there have been some weird and wonderful places that we would just never have found with just human eyes alone or human nose alone. So again, for dealing with illicit products, intelligence gathering is essential to help us find the problems. We can't just be approaching businesses without a reason all of the time. And so it is, and obviously Northumberland is such a big place that we need that information coming to us as to where these products are being sold from. So any information that anybody has, again, to reiterate, anything that you might hear from residents or anything that you might hear yourselves, if you could please forward that information to us at tradingstandards@northumberland.gov.uk. As far as illicit tobacco is concerned, we work in collaboration with the Fresh Keep It Out campaign, and there is a website for this campaign where anonymous online reporting can be made by anybody. There are a lot of materials for this campaign, and I'm sure that you've potentially heard the advertising on the radio. They do run drives and pushes for this at intervals across the year, and it really does have an effect on the amount of intelligence that we receive. So anybody that supports us in this campaign, we're very grateful for. So what are the sanctions for the sale of illicit products? Offences under the Trademarks Act do carry a maximum penalty of 10 years imprisonment, which usually comes as a bit of a shock to most people because there isn't the realisation that that one particularly is such a serious offence. As far as that is concerned, the thinking behind it is that, again, trademarks issues are often the work of organised crime groups, and has been linked to people trafficking, child trafficking, all sorts of nasty stuff, which is why it carries such a hefty sentence. So for anybody that's like running a business in Northumberland, we're not saying that the actual fronts of the business are the organised crime group themselves. They're often the stooges, if you like, for want of a better phrase, that are put in place. But we can use also the licence to sell alcohol route as a means of dealing with illicit products, because the sale of illicit products is not supporting the prevention of crime and disorder, because it is a crime. And as I've already said, that where illicit tobacco is sold, it is often sold to children, which is not protecting them from harm. And it can also amount to being a public nuisance. And this is a concept that features heavily in another enforcement tool that we've started to use in trading standards, which is closure notices. So I'll give you a little bit more about that. So persistent sales of illicit tobacco from retail premises have been a problem in Northumberland in the last year. And as a result of trading standards efforts, 3 premises in Ashington were closed by magistrates for 3, 2 and 1 month periods earlier this year. And it was achieved using provisions under the Antisocial Behaviour, Crime and Policing Act 2014. So this was a new area of work for trading standards here in this authority. So in the first instance, we issued a closure notice because we were able to show that the persistent sale of illicit tobacco from the premises had resulted in nuisance to members of the public. And that notice was necessary to prevent the nuisance from continuing. So when I talk about nuisance, we had evidence that showed that other businesses in the area that were selling tobacco that was legal product, their business was affected by the fact that this cheap illicit tobacco was available around the corner. It was also attracting in lots of people into the area that wouldn't have been there otherwise, and it was a repeated problem. Trading standards would go in, we would seize the product. Within 24 hours, it would be fully restocked, and they were continuing on. So within 48 hours of issuing that closure notice, there was a hearing at the Magistrates Court where we were able to show that a person, as in the business owner, had engaged in criminal behaviour on the premises, which was the selling of illicit tobacco, and that we needed the order from the court to prevent that behaviour from continuing. Every other measure that we had tried in trading standards to deal with this problem just simply wasn't working. So closure of the premises was the next thing to do. So in 2 of those 3 cases, the business owners chose not to reopen the premises once the order expired. And so the message was there loud and clear that we would not tolerate the sale of illicit products in our business in Northumberland. In the 3rd case, they were a little bit more persistent, and they did reopen at the expiry of the closure order, but immediately the sale of illicit tobacco resumed, and also evidence of underage sales became apparent. So to deal with this, an application was made for licence review, and it was brought before the committee. The licence was revoked, and the business owners chose that they would stop trading in Northumberland and take their business into somewhere else in the northeast, which obviously isn't great for that alternative authority, but from our point of view in Northumberland, we drove it out. Okay, so the future work that we're looking at in trading standards, regular test purchasing operations are back. This is something that has been done with regularity pre-COVID. During COVID, we obviously had to stop that activity, but we are back with a regular programme now. We also have a funded fair trading officer position that Public Health have been paying for just over 18 months, which is to specifically target illicit tobacco and illicit alcohol. That is a post that I'm hopeful that we can continue to have with further funding, because we have produced some really good results as a result of having that resource. We wouldn't have been able to do the closure work that we've done without that resource. Another thing that I've secured some funding for production of corporate branded educational material for our retailers. So go back to the beginning and what I'm saying about how the legal requirements are quite complex in some instances as far as illicit products are concerned. Underage sales, we can provide them with things like refusals ledgers, like Challenge 25 posters. So that is something that we're hoping to roll out over the next year or so. And we've also got a refreshed commitment to increasing intelligence reporting, and I reiterate that everybody can play a part in this. So please, please remember, trading standards at northumberland.gov.uk. So does anybody have any questions?
Thank you very much, Laura. An insight into trading standards. Are there any questions? Councillor Sesford.
Hi, thank you very much for that. Very interesting. I was just thinking of the refusal ledgers, and I'm an ex-fireman, so I used to do fire prevention visits for donkeys years, 18 years or something, and we used to check logbooks and things like that, and you never knew who filled them in, when they filled them in. They say they're going to fill them in there. I mean, you know, when you have the same pen used for 10 different items and same writing. So I'm not so sure if they know that they expect to have refusals, then there's a distinct possibility that probably fill these in themselves. No, that's going to make a great deal of difference, I don't think. I think it's just something you do, which I wouldn't put a lot of heed to that. There was one thing, though, if it was mentioned, I apologise, I didn't catch it, but sales to people under 18, illegal, yeah? What happens if you suspect or know, or led to believe, that people over 18 are buying alcohol on premises and passing it to underage off premises, which I know happens. Yeah. We all know it happens, but and I'm sure the shopkeeper would know it happens. So what are the things we can do against that? Okay. How do you prove that the shopkeeper wasn't totally unaware?
So the term that we use for that is proxy sales. Right. When somebody over 18 goes in to buy alcohol to supply to somebody, or any other product to supply to somebody underage, that is where we work with the shop to educate them as to what the law says. And this is where we start to do things like through the licence. If there is a stipulation in the licensing conditions about having CCTV, and that is available for production on request for viewing by an enforcement officer, that we were able to look at that. And 9 times out of 10, the CCTV covers the outside of the premises. So often these things are kind of picked up through that. It is more difficult. I'm not going to fib. It is more difficult to pick up offences where that's happening and actually enforce those offences, but it isn't unheard of. It has happened in other authorities that I've worked in, and there have been instances whereby businesses have been held to account for that activity.
Just a quick follow-up with that, if that's all right, Chair. little corner shops is what most people suspect that this happens about, because it doesn't always just happen from there. It could happen from a large supermarket.
Yeah.
And they could be bought for kids who have them later on that night in parks and things like that. Now, I know up my area there's often police take stuff off the kids and pour it out and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, is there a requirement for any marking on the packaging? So if somebody buys a 12-pack of some, I don't know, think of some Skull Lager or something, would they have identifications of where it came from? And if you did, would you trace it back to the something, say, the product you've been selling has got into underage hands?
With alcohol, there isn't specific marking of that type, but there are lot numbers on alcohol and the best before dates, and sometimes like if there's price stickers used and that kind of thing, then if that kind of packaging is found and it can be traced back to shops in the local vicinity, then there is work that we can do there. We also do work closely with the police and in the process of kind of building those relationships more to share the intelligence of where the police are finding the groups of kids and tipping out the alcohol. If they give that, if they're talking and engaging at that front line with those kids and getting the information out of them as to where they're buying the products from or where they're obtaining them from, then that is something that they counts as intelligence for us to be able to target those premises.
Councillor Gallagher.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Just a couple of searching questions. I also have concerns about the refusal ledger. I think it should be the refusal and challenge ledger, and that should be cross-referenced with CCTV that they've got within their shops. So, for example, if somebody comes in at 9 o'clock at night, has been challenged to that, you can always cross-reference that, because it's like everything else. You know, they're just going to fill it in the same respect. The other thing that I was going to mention was around cigarettes more than anything else. I'm being very mindful not to use website names here, but the internet. I've seen cigarettes up for sale on the internet on various sites. Now, some challenge it and others don't, but it's still there. People are still selling cigarettes on there. You ask for information from elected members and generally getting the message out to the public. I think, what are your links like with the parish and town councils? Because in my town, we've got 6 county councillors, but we've got 18 parish councillors that kind of are the ears to the ground as well. And the last thing was that you mentioned of premises being closed down and moving to more other areas. Do you follow on with the information that you've got and feed in? So, for example, if they move out of Northumberland and go into Newcastle, does that mark go with them as well?
Okay, so there's 3 separate things there, which I'll start with the last one. In trading standards across the country, we do work relatively closely with each other through various kind of groups and link-ins with regional working and national working. And we also have something called IDB, which is an intelligence database. So everything that we're doing and everything that's happening, we do add entries into this IDB database that is then shared with other authorities, generally within the North East. We go the extra mile because we have such close relationships with our colleagues in trading standards across the North East, and we will actively share that information. So in the instance that I referred to, yes, the information was shared with the relevant local authority in full detail. Okay, so that's that part of thing. The second part of things, you mentioned about the parish councils. I have only been in post here for just over a year, and obviously when I first started with this council, we were still very much in the restrictions that were imposed on us by COVID. So we are now coming out of that, and there is now the time to start building up those relationships with those other partners to get that network going of sharing information. And then thirdly, the bit about the refusals registers. I am aware that they can be a contentious area, and I'm also very much aware that in terms of the completion, that it's not always the honest truth that is recorded in there. But I've worked in trading standards for 25 years, and I think you can pretty much tell when that's happened. And usually there are ways of kind of dealing with that. It's not something that we would just accept at face value. But also to add into that in those 25 years, it is actually quite astounding the number of people that just don't fill it in. They don't even know where it is when they're asked to produce it. So that in itself is notable, that the staff do not know what we're talking about when we ask for the refusals register, which does not demonstrate that the business has taken all reasonable precautions by training their staff on what it is that we're referring to.
Sorry, Chair, the last one was the internet.
So the internet, yeah, sorry, missed that one. I think I know what particular site that you're referring to in terms of that marketplace. And we are aware that there are issues, but we do very much depend upon intelligence being provided to us about that activity. There is more work that we are hoping to do over the next year with identification of those issues, but that one is not quite as straightforward in terms of regulating as what we would prefer it to be. I think that's probably the most diplomatic way of answering that question.
Councillor Parry.
Thanks, Chair. I'm told you can buy illegal vapes. How do you tell the difference?
Sorry, can you repeat that, please?
I'm told you can buy illegal vapes.
Illegal vapes?
Yeah, how do you tell the difference?
Because there are a lot of legal requirements for vapes in terms of the tank size. The biggest giveaway is the number of, if it's a disposable vape, for example, which are what we're having the biggest problems with at the moment, is the number of puffs that it claims that it can give. Because a tank size, the restrictions that are on the size of the tank should only be able to give you X number of puffs. And these 7,000 puffs, there's just no way that that is going to work. So there's either a misdescription in terms of the number of puffs you actually get, or the tank size is bigger than it's supposed to be. So that's the most obvious way. Also, the checking of the MHRA register is another way of identifying. That is the easiest thing that members of the public could do. And also we are finding in Northumberland that the illegal vapes are no longer out on open display and they've been hidden away, but we do find them.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Lee.
Just on obviously you cover such a broad area from petrol sales to alcohol sales and things like that. How do you decide which way to go on it? So from my point of view, the biggest problem I see is children buying energy drinks underage, like legally produced energy drinks, not counterfeit ones over the counters, whereas alcohol sales, I think from my experience, younger people are less likely to drink these days. So how would you decide, is the energy drink going to do them more harm or alcohol?
Okay, so we are intelligence-led, which is a word that is used often in enforcement. So this is where we react to the information that we're provided with. So if we've received a complaint that it's alcohol that's being sold underage in a particular shop, that's what we target, the actual alcohol. In the preemptive work and the advisory work that we do, we cover all bases, go over everything. It isn't just on the products that we think might be the problem. But if the complaint was, say, about cigarettes that was being bought from a different shop, we would test purchase for cigarettes. So we react as closely to the information that we get given as we can. We also do something called horizon scanning, which is another posh way of saying we just keep an eye on what is going on around the country. And if there's new legislation that is coming into force, such as with energy drinks and the supply to young people, there hasn't actually a lot of what is happening up to now. I'm not, to be honest with you, I honestly not sure yet whether that legislation has come into force about the sale of energy drinks to young people. It's always been voluntary up to this point as to whether or not businesses do sell to under 18s. But that has to be dealt with on an advisory basis only until that law comes into play.
Just one other one.
Yeah.
Probably my biggest bugbear for alcohol isn't really counterfeit alcohol as such. It's when you go into licensed premises and the pubs, for instance, are selling multi-pack bottles of Budweiser and, you know, making a huge markup from buying them, presumably from supermarkets before they pass them off in the pubs. And I don't feel that gets enforced very often. Certainly in the northeast, a lot of premises I visit, I've seen multi-packs getting passed off, be it crisps or, you know, Budweiser and stuff like that. And
Because ultimately, it's not a criminal offence to sell a multi-pack item. It's a breach of contract between the manufacturer of that item and the person that's selling it. Because usually it'll have printed on, this is a multi-pack, not to be sold as a separate item. And provided that the food labelling is correct and that all the information that is meant to be on the product is there, then from the trading standards point of view, that's all that we expect.
Councillor, I've forgotten it again.
Thank you, Chair. Just another question. You said that your business, your drive, is intelligence-led.
Yeah.
So what happens if, ironically, Joe Public, an elected member, gives you that information in confidence?
Yeah.
How do we know, and how does the public know that you've actually attended that particular premises? So is it just an element of trust? And the reason why I'm saying that, just say you get 100 to 200 people saying that there's an issue in various shops all the way around Northumberland.
Yeah.
You're never going to cover all of those.
Okay. There's a few different ways that I can answer this. That I can categorically state that up to now, every piece of intelligence that we receive, we act on. 100%. And that is actually part of our key performance indicators for trading standards. There is a very specific one in there about underage sales, how many reports there've been and how many we've responded to. As far as an individual knowing whether or not we've responded to their complaints, then that, unfortunately, they're only going to really know that if they are on record in terms of who they are and for us to be able to make contact with that person. And I will say that as far as we're concerned, it's not really an issue for us to have the details of the complainant because we are bound by GDPR, so we can't disclose any of that information to anybody else anyway. So it is only for in-house use that we know who's made the complaint. And it is better for us if somebody's on record because it means that we can ask for some more information and get a bit more kind of direction if the initial information isn't as comprehensive as it could be. It is usual that people will have a little bit more information than what they're putting forward in the first instance because they don't necessarily know what it is that we want to know. And if somebody is on record, then we will always let them know bits and pieces. We would definitely say we have received that information and we will act upon it. We won't necessarily give the detail as to what we've done, but like I say, everything does get accounted for and actioned.
Thank you. Any more? I know it's been a long session, or turning into a long session. Eyes are starting to close. Thank you very much, Laura, for the presentation and a look into trading standards. Right, date and time for the next meeting is Thursday. I'll have to put these on. Tuesday the 20th of December 2022. I have no urgent business. I now close the meeting. Thank you very much for attending.